Andrew, I got a surprise for you. You may have seen it already if you saw my social media like a month ago. I put one picture of this up. All right.
Okay.
You ready? Here we go. This is something I hate. I absolutely hate this.
You look like your dad.
I 100% look like my father. If you're just
you look like your dad.
If you are just listening to this, I put on my glasses. I got glasses about a month ago. They're just for reading or like up close stuff.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, because I was at the optometrist and I was like, oh man, I like these glasses that don't have the frame all the way around. And then I picked them up and put them on at home and I was like, my father has glasses that don't have the frame all the way around.
I'm expecting you to try to sell me roofing.
He doesn't do that anymore.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a whole big story. I think
he did when I knew him.
But... He did, yeah. He did up until like a few months ago.
Okay.
There's a whole big story with that I can get into another time with you. But yeah. No, I got glasses. You know, that also reminds me, that comment you made. I showed my students a year and a half ago a picture of my family when I was being blessed as a baby, right? Baby blessing, newborn, whatever. And in the picture is my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, who was holding me.
Yeah.
And I put this picture on the screen because we were talking about World War II. And I was talking about my great-grandfather's experiences with World War II. So I put that up on the screen and be like, hey, I met him a few times. And they looked at that picture and said, Mr. Stockford, whose baby are you holding?
Yeah, like, who are those three identical-looking people?
I don't know about that far, but they were like, why are you holding someone's baby? And I'm like, I'm the baby. And they flipped. They were like, no way.
Okay, I think this is something that we need to slate for a social media post, is that picture that you're describing. And then I'll post a video of my dad christening the sailboat that we bought in, I think it was like 1998. Yeah. And he's like doing the ceremony, like reading off a thing. And it's, I thought it was me, like, wow, because I had never seen this, but I honestly, like, for a second I thought it was me. And then I noticed this little kid running through the frame. That little kid was me. I was like 4 years old.
So I know you're not the oldest, but you're the. Sorry, go ahead. You finish.
Oh, just like he has a beard. His voice sounds exactly the same as mine. Like his like manner of speaking is exactly the same as me.
Look at us, little Wish.com versions of our parents.
Yeah. Well, no, I think they're the Wish.com versions of us.
Yeah, we're the Kirkland signature.
Yes, yeah. Quality product at a lower price.
Right. Speaking of which, you can buy my affection or my time.
Okay. I think that's only legal in Nevada, but...
Oh, my gosh. Well, oh, my gosh. That took a second. You just called me a whore.
You know what? Sex work is honest work. Should be legal everywhere. That's my newest hot take. Welcome to Agreeable Disagreements. It's a show where two friends with differing political ideologies debate topics in politics. My name is Andrew. This is my co-host Camron. And what is our first topic this week?
There's a lot that has happened in the last couple of weeks, but we want to focus on two things today. We're going to talk about the cocaine in the White House scandal and also the Supreme Court case about affirmative action, which you could argue isn't specifically about affirmative action and is more about race and college admissions.
Yes.
You could argue either way. But we're going to talk about both of those things today, starting with the cocaine in the White House. You go ahead.
Boy, am I so disappointed that I left it there.
I was going to ask if you had been there recently. You beat me to it.
No, but actually, I think so. My parents had a trip planned to Washington D.C. and they got on the list to because apparently, in order to tour the White House, you have to request it like basically exactly 3 months in advance, like no sooner, no later.
Right.
And I have a family member who she I think was the like director of maritime commerce or something under the Obama administration, and I think that's how they got like an in with this. I actually don't know if like she even had to pull any strings, but they were going there to visit her, and they were meaning to go to the White House to take a tour, but then both my parents got COVID, and I want to say it might line up with the timeline of when they found the cocaine.
That is interesting.
So they could have potentially, like, had they gone, been on that tour. But yeah, what are your initial thoughts? Because I think I'm squarely in the it was definitely a visitor to the White House.
Oh, no, sir. I
No?
vehemently disagree with that.
You think it was Biden's?
I don't know about his. You're telling me that
I don't know. Sleepy Joe's got to stay awake somehow.
That reminds me of a meme I saw that I sent to one of my friends. Of course, it won't open right now. Hold on. Let me pull it up really quick. It was it's a tweet, a screenshot of a tweet, but it was, you cannot call him Sleepy Joe and be mad he has cocaine. Do you want him up or not?
Yeah.
Anyway, you're telling me that one of the most notorious and easily sought after, looked out for in security situations, drugs, made it into the White House.
Yes.
Arguably the most secure building on the earth.
I think we're seeing that that's not actually the case.
Well, that's what I'm going to get at. And nobody somehow, there's no way we can catch it. You're telling me there's no way of being like, because they found it in a locker. Let's just use the cameras that we all know are in this building to look at who went to that locker that day. You're telling me that's not possible. So I'm thinking one of two things happened. Either one, it's not nearly as secure as we think, as you suggested.
Yes.
Or two, it belonged to someone it definitely shouldn't have belonged to higher up. Whether that is a cabinet member or a family member.
Somebody who had sway to be able to make it
go away,
disappear. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not discounting that. Like, I'm not ruling that out. But I think I'm a huge fan of Occam's razor. I think the simplest explanation is usually the best.
I love that.
I think it's, if you know anything about airport security, very secure. It's incredibly easy to get stuff through.
Again, speaking from experience here, Andrew.
No, actually, kind of, because I did not do this intentionally.
Sure.
As our listeners of previous episodes know, I'm a gun owner, and I also lived in Ireland. A couple days before I moved to Ireland, I had gone out target shooting, and I had inadvertently left a 22 caliber cartridge in my pocket of like my jeans or something.
Yeah. Those are so small, you'll forget them and miss them anyway. Like,
they are, in fact. And don't ask me why, but I have one right here. That's how small of a thing we're talking about.
Yeah.
It was in my pocket. I got pulled out for the extra like full body scan at SeaTac when I was going over there.
I'm surprised they didn't do a full cavity search on you.
Well, I didn't say they didn't. But this cartridge wasn't in any of my cavities. But I made it through that whole screening, and they did not catch it. Even through the metal detector, they didn't catch it.
Wow.
A couple weeks later, there was a news story about like a U.S. airline that they found a 22 caliber cartridge, this exact thing that I had in my pocket and made it all the way over to Ireland with, totally inadvertently. I did not know that I had this.
Yeah.
I didn't even find it, for like a couple weeks until after. But they had like a flight attendant had found one of these on the floor of a plane when they were boarding. And they took everyone off, and they had, they just like totally scrubbed the whole plane. They had dogs come in, like the whole shebang.
Jeez.
And so I think it just like a lot of the security for these secure locations, a lot of it's really just theater.
Yeah,
I know tons of friends who, they go through airport security all the time, and they have like their weed vape pens, or they're going to like an EDM show in like Las Vegas, and they're bringing like more illicit drugs than just weed. Again, not me. I'm not. I have never done that. I'm never going to do that.
Right.
But I think it would surprise you how not secure these secure locations are. And I think the easiest explanation is these were lockers that were they were being used by White House staff, but it's also where about 500 visitors in the span of time that they think it happened, about 500 people had been through there using these lockers. And it was such a small amount that it doesn't surprise me that it got overlooked. And I think it really just fell out of a visitor's pocket. Now, it also wouldn't surprise me if it was White House staff. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, someone fairly high up in the White House. But I don't think that's the simplest explanation.
I mean, I agree. And I'm not going to immediately jump to the same conclusions that a lot of people will say, and be like, it's the staff members, it's the Secretary of Defense, or it's Hunter Biden's. Like, I'm not going to jump to that conclusion immediately.
I mean, it's certainly not. It's certainly not like I've seen people being like, it's Hunter Biden, and it's like, no, it's not.
I think he wasn't there.
He wasn't there.
Yeah.
I think he's like, he's been having some issues. I think he's smart enough to not bring drugs into the White House when he's under this much scrutiny.
Is he?
I think so.
I hope so.
For one thing, I think he is still successfully in recovery,
which is good. Yeah.
Which is good. Kudos to him.
And I want to be clear, like, I'm not going to sit here and say 100% it was him. I know he wasn't there. I know it's not his. Yeah. I think people are latching on to the fact that he has that pass and are putting it on him.
Yeah.
But
honestly, that's really detrimental to his recovery process, I would imagine.
It is. Like, I mean, can you imagine if you were you're trying to get sober and stay sober.
Yeah. You're trying to do the right thing, and people are
constantly berating you and saying that you're not, or you're still on it. It can't be easy.
Yeah.
That all being said, okay, he did some really rough stuff to try and cover up a lot of his other things.
Sure.
And did not do them very well.
Sure.
So, I hope he's smart enough to not have done that. And I know he didn't do it.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I can confidently say that he is.
Yeah.
And it's not just him. It's a lot of the people in the current cabinet who, and I know that every administration has people who say and do crazy things, but you look at like Biden's current press secretaries that are just not very good at dodging the questions when they are fielding questions from reporters. They're some of the worst I've seen.
Wait, is Jen Psaki still his like lead press secretary? Because I think she was fantastic at it.
She
I'm
was
just not
all right.
As familiar. I think she was great.
Now it's Karine Jean-Pierre.
Okay, I'm not familiar with her at all. I thought Jen Psaki did a really good job. Now that could be in the wake of having Spicer and oh god, what was the Scaramucci and all, just the Sarah Huckabee Sanders, like just the worst people that you could ever imagine.
Yeah. I think part of the problem, and I will say, I don't agree with Obama on a lot of policies, but I feel like the quality of a lot of his picks were better than what we have gotten out of Trump or Biden.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, I would say I don't know as much about Biden's picks. I think to my own fault, like, because I was just so relieved that it wasn't Trump. I think Trump is just a masterclass in the wrong people to pick. And while I don't think that they all at one point or another like got fired and replaced like because I think they were doing a bad job. I don't think that's why Trump fired and replaced so many of them. I think that had to do with ego.
Boys club. Yeah, it was 100%
as soon as you fell out of favor. But I think even if you overlook the reason why they left their job, I think all of them should have been fired and replaced, regardless of whether it was just, they wouldn't play into his cronies.
Yeah. I think he picked people based on relationship and not merit. And that's
100%.
I mean, as a leader, that's your call to make. I'm not going to say it was better or worse, because you obviously have to know something about the people you're going to hire. And you can't tell me that John Kerry wasn't a relationship pick for Obama's cabinet.
I think I can.
Oh, come on. What was he secretary of? Is he defense?
He was Secretary of State.
Secretary of State?
Yeah.
I
think he was a second choice pick because Obama couldn't pick Hillary. I think Hillary was wildly
She was in his cabinet
effective. Too. She was Secretary of State before John Kerry.
Okay.
But because she was going to be running for president.
Oh, that's right.
I think that's why he had.
I forgot about that. That's a good point.
Although I don't know, is there I was thinking about this the other day because George Bush had Colin Powell and then Condoleezza Rice. Is there like a not a statute of limitations, but a term limit for Secretary of State? Are you only allowed to serve one term?
That's a good question. Let me Google that. Are there term limits for presidential cabinet members? I'm not seeing anything.
Okay.
Interesting. It may have just been a qualifications, or maybe they left for different reasons.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was weird because I really admire Colin Powell. I think he was a great Secretary of State. And I've always kind of wondered why Condoleezza Rice was his Secretary of State in his second term. I don't necessarily think she did a bad job. I actually just listened to I have a lot of respect for her. I just listened to I think it's one of Jon Stewart's episodes of his podcast. He actually had Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice at the same time, and the three of them had a conversation.
That's interesting.
It's intensely fascinating. But obviously they don't agree, but like you can tell these are two incredibly educated people who just fundamentally understand the issues that they were dealing with on another level than any of us will ever. I don't think John Kerry did as good of a job as Hillary Clinton. I do think he was a moderately good pick for Secretary of State.
I've just not been a huge fan of his, and it's not necessarily because there's a lot of stuff I disagree with him on, so much as I feel like there are stronger picks for a lot of things.
Sure.
He's the Mario in Mario Kart. Mario's like good enough in all of the realms in Mario Kart, but he's not.
He ticks all the boxes, but there's no like bonus.
Right. Yeah. Or if we're putting it in D&D terms, he's the human race, right? Because the human race, or the fighter class, human race and fighter class, you get like the same bonus all around, but you don't get a good bonus in anything, right? So it's good for some things, not great.
It's you're a jack of all trades, really,
but a master of none.
But a master of none.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to cocaine. That's what we're talking about.
You know, I'm not a huge like Daily Wire fan. I don't really care for that. My wife is.
I am very much not. I'm very much an anti-Daily Wire fan.
I mean, my wife likes some of them. I think of the ones, Ben Shapiro is probably the more logical of the people that are on there. He tends to... I'm not going to sit here and say I like him. I don't watch his show. But when I hear stuff from him, I tend to think it's a little bit more centered in logic than in other things. Than the other people, like Michael Knowles or them.
Okay.
What I will say, the reason I bring this up is because throughout the whole White House cocaine scandal, they have had some of the funniest terms for cocaine that they have used on their shows, including, but not limited to, this is my favorite one, calling it, and I will preface this by saying they jokingly, and are very clearly jokingly, ascribing it purely to Hunter Biden. But they're clear about it being a joke. One of them called it Hunter Biden booger sugar.
Okay, I was gonna honestly, if I had to guess, I would have said it would have had something to do with booger sugar. There's also nose candy. I mean,
yeah,
snow.
I've heard nose candy. I've heard snow. I've heard blow, but I had never heard booger sugar.
You'd never heard booger sugar?
Heard booger sugar.
Oh, yeah. No, they're not original when they said that. It is funny. But it's
I figured it wasn't original, but
yeah, no, booger sugar is yeah.
I know what booger sugar is. You don't have to tell me.
No. I was just saying, like, booger sugar, like, that's been around for a while.
Okay.
But yeah, so back to the actual
the cocaine
finding of this. I think honestly, like, I know that yeah, there's cameras. Yeah, everyone gets searched. Like, there is an established amount of security, and I don't think, I'm not of the opinion that the Secret Service or White House police did, like, I don't think they were negligent. I think that honestly, this is just not that important, and I think that's why they gave up the investigation, is because it's a small amount. It was, I mean, it's, I forget what the amount was, but it's like,
it wasn't even like a full pack or anything. It was like remnants. Someone was like,
oh,
it looks like, it looked like someone had done a line where it was.
Yeah.
So,
and
it wasn't even a full dose.
It's just like, there are so many other things. Like, I would much rather them focus on, like, continuing the January 6th prosecutions than being worried about who left their empty bag of cocaine.
See, now I will agree with you a little bit there, but I will say my issue here isn't so much, well, it's partially that it made it in there, because heck, if that's supposed to be super secure and it didn't, then I agree. I don't know that they were being negligent, but they might need to address their procedures and update their policies a little bit more.
Sure, yeah.
My bigger issue here is the inequality of how it's handled, because you see people get arrested or searched or have their entire lives ruined because they were neighbors of someone who had cocaine.
Oh, yeah, certainly. Or because they're riding in a car with somebody who has drugs.
Right, yeah. Or, heck, you might even have a rental car that you just got in today, but the previous person, or even 2 or 3 people before you, had something in there. You know, I feel like my bigger problem is not the fact that it was in there so much as the inequality with which it was handled. I feel like if this had been a restaurant, if this had been somebody's home, if this had been a car being pulled over, or heck, even if it was a Greyhound bus and you had 50 people on there and no way of telling whose it is, if it's even anybody's, it would have been handled completely differently. But the fact that it's somebody in that White House, whether it was, and I think they said it was likely a staff member. The fact that
I haven't seen that. I from what I've seen, everyone that is directly involved with the case has said, like, basically, like, I'm refusing to speculate until more information comes out.
And that's probably true. I thought I saw one where they said it's probably, but that may have been probably a staff member's, but that was before they concluded no suspect and they were dropping it. But either way, just the fact that it's happening in the White House is very different. And I think it's also the same where, you see rock stars who, heck, I'm reading a book right now all about the rise and fall of 80s hard rock and metal. And it's titled Nothing But a Good Time. And heck, all the cocaine that they did, everything in there, and they didn't go to prison for it. So part of it is class. Part of it
Eric Clapton wrote a song called Cocaine.
Right. Probably
Do you think he wasn't actively using cocaine while he wrote that song?
Oh my gosh.
I'm going to sit down and write a song about something that is not within my immediate view.
Right. Well, it's the same with, was it Tom Petty and Last Dance with Mary Jane? Is that who sang that song? Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my bigger problem.
I have my guitar right here and I can play that song.
Ooh.
I'm not going to, but...
Good, thank you. Oh, please, dear God. No, I'm joking.
You're like, I spent 4 years listening to you play music. Never again.
Well, to be fair, most of the music I heard you play was on a trombone, not a guitar.
That's true. Anyway. Although I did guitar for Winter Drumline when we did the Michael Jackson show.
That's true. I forgot you were in that.
Yeah.
That was
so much fun.
Oh yeah.
But I was the only. It was me. I think it was me, Brian, and Todd. We were the only because we were the pit orchestra.
I was in the pit too for that, man. I was on the vibraphone.
Oh, you were? I thought you were in. I thought you were. Then no. Then it was the four of us. We were the only ones that weren't allowed to do the Thriller dance. Yeah. Yep. That always made me mad. I thought that you were on snare for that, or at least
no. That was the next year. That was the next year on is when I went to drumline.
Okay. Well, anyway.
Anyway.
Sorry. What were you going to say before that?
No, I'm not someone to bring class into things. I'm not a Marxist. I'm what you would even verge to say anti-Marxist. But I think that there is a class inequality here. But the difference is instead of it coming from work, as Marx would put it, it's coming from a government handling of things. There is a very clear, distinct difference in how things are handled based on your class status. And the fact that it happened in the White House, and they're just magically saying no suspect, that kind of pisses me off. Oh, certainly. And I think there's a very good case to be made that was even more true of people who were in the White House a lot during the last presidency. Right. Particularly direct family members of the 45th president. Well, let's be clear. Also direct family members of the 46th. Yeah, but I've never watched a speech of Hunter Biden's and been like, that man's on cocaine. I have never not watched a speech of Don Jr. and thought, that man's never touched cocaine in his life. So, and I've just never seen a speech of Don Jr. Well, that's because he's too busy in the bathroom. Doing booger sugar. This is all speculation. Yeah. But, I think I totally agree with you saying that it's kind of, it's absurd that there's different rules for different classes of people. Yeah. And I think from my point of view, it really speaks to, the need to nationally do something like Oregon did, I think a couple years ago, where I think it was a referendum vote. So I think meaning that like it was or was it an initiative? I don't know. It was presented when by they decriminalized most drugs, right? Well, all drugs. That's right. They're decriminalized. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get arrested for things like sale, things like providing drugs to minors.
that doesn't mean that you're not going to get a fine for possession, but it's not going to go on your criminal record. And so far, that has been wildly effective at reducing recidivism.
Can you define that term for me, just so I'm making sure I understand what you're saying?
Recidivism, and I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, is people who commit a crime go through, and then reoffending. Because especially in a time where like opiates are a huge problem and a huge contributor to things like homelessness.
Sure.
What you're doing is you're punishing people for not being able to handle the repercussions of their prior punishment. And so you're kind of punishing them for being punished. When really what we need to do is get them treatment, get them a safe way to detox if possible, help them, provide them with resources to get them out of situations that are driving them to drug use. But I think that what I'm getting at is that Nancy Reagan's war on drugs, I think, is one of the most detrimental things to ever happen to America. And there's plenty of statistics to back that up.
We can go into the war on drugs another time, because that's one of those things where I think good in principle, bad in execution.
Yeah.
But I will push back just a little bit on the effects of decriminalization. Now, granted, I am not currently living in Oregon. You are. And I will readily admit you are seeing this much more firsthand than I have been able to. Mm-hmm. However, when I have visited Oregon since it's passed, I see way more stuff just out in the open, on the streets downtown. And it used to just be you walk around downtown Eugene, you're like, oh, there's like 8 people smoking pot on that corner. And now it's like, oh, there's like 12 people smoking pot in that corner, 2 people doing meth, and 3 people shooting up.
Yeah, I was in Portland in April for the Specialty Coffee Expo, and one of the nights we were there, my boss and I went out to grab pizza and some drinks. He ended up going home. I ended up connecting with some friends, but I'm walking down the street, and I think I was looking for directions, and I walked up to a picnic table that was outside of a restaurant that was closed, but they had like picnic tables on the street, and there was a group of people sitting there, and I walked up to them and I was like, "Excuse me, is this is this Division or whatever street it was? Is that this way?" And they all like jumped and were startled by me, and that's when I noticed that they were all there about to get ready to cook some heroin in a spoon.
Right. And, I am, as a libertarian, I'm all for the idea of do what you want. And as someone who never has done nothing that wasn't prescribed by a doctor and plans to never do any drug that wasn't prescribed to me by a doctor, that is something that I think if you're going to do it, that should be something done in private. That shouldn't be something that I see out in public, because my idea is you should have the right to do whatever you want as long as it's not putting other people at risk. And doing hard drugs in public, even soft drugs like marijuana, you can get a secondhand high, and you might now be inhibiting somebody else.
You can't. As somebody who has smoked weed and quite a bit of it, you can't get a secondhand high. That is not a thing. And that's been clinically shown that you can get a secondhand high. You're not going to get a secondhand high by walking by somebody that's smoking.
And that's fair.
It's got to be a much larger concentration.
That's fair. I get that. But the idea of it in public, though, just like we say don't smoke in public, it's still considered a rude thing to smoke cigarettes in public, and you can do it.
Sure. Yeah.
I think it's the same kind of deal. Now, that also being said, when I Google effects of decriminalization of drugs in Oregon, I get a very mixed bag. I'm seeing a lot of things that's saying from the early start, like from the early years, some of the stories that are popping up are saying, oh yeah, it reduced numbers like this. But when you look at more recent ones, it's not looking too good. A lot of the headlines and articles are saying it was a quote failure.
No, see, okay, so that doesn't surprise me. What we're dealing with is certain authors of these articles misconstruing causation and correlation. Yes, there has been an increase in particularly opiates, mainly fentanyl, use in Oregon. There's an increase in that nationwide. And just because there is an increase doesn't mean that decriminalization has been ineffective.
Only 1% of the people who are being sent to rehab are actually going.
Well, yeah, that's not. I don't think that's the statistic that you look at, though. Look at the I think there's a lot of there are things that are correlated that could be used as metrics,
sure,
to show why it's not working versus having actual information to show causation that it's not working.
We should do a whole episode on this in the future, because I feel like I don't know nearly enough about it, and we could do a whole hour on this on its own.
Here's my main point.
Yeah.
One of the strictest states on drugs is Utah.
Yeah.
And Utah has the highest rate of opiate use nationwide. And it's not homeless people. It's not, criminals. It's suburban families. And that shows the pervasiveness of particularly opiates, but it also shows the difference in I think, who we think of as, drug abusers.
Yeah.
What I think is probably the better solution to criminalizing drugs, because we know that criminalizing drugs doesn't work. That it has a whole slew of repercussions that are not beneficial to the drug users. It also costs taxpayers a lot of money. One thing that has been shown to be very effective are things like safe injection sites, places that are staffed by nurses, where people who are addicted to drugs, mainly intravenous drugs, can go get clean needles.
And if they need a thing in Narcan, it's right there with a qualified person to administer.
Yeah. And also I've been looking at how I can just order a bunch of Narcan and I just want to start passing it out. Because I actually had a friend, not a super close friend, but somebody that I've known for quite a few years. I don't particularly know the whole story, but from what I've heard, he passed away from fentanyl overdose a couple months ago. And so I was thinking about, just getting just a shitload of Narcan and just passing it out to people in our, our shared friend group, and
at the very least. And at the very least, you can just keep it on you in emergency situations. You can use it on someone who needs it.
I would love to never need it.
Right.
I would love even more. No, I would love the most to not need it. But if I did need it, I would really, really, really love to have it on hand.
Right. And that's the whole emergency preparedness thing. No one wants to spend the money on the spare tire, but no one wants to be stranded in the middle of nowhere even more.
Right.
Kind of a thing.
Right.
No, and I think it's a good thing to have. I mean, that's one of the reasons why every car I have, I put jumper cables in, because one, hey, might help me, but more so I can help people who need it.
I can help someone else. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because I'm not going to be shooting up anytime soon. I can tell you that.
Yeah.
But it's especially with how pervasive opiate use in particular, and I know we're getting off the topic of cocaine, but with how pervasive opiate use has become and is continuing to grow, I think it's it's only wise to assume that you're going to run into it eventually.
Right. I think this is a good place. Well, I think this is a good place to transition, and we can go into the Supreme Court affirmative action case right after this break. Are you tired of living in a world where humans are in charge? Do you dream of a day when AI will finally take over and make all of the decisions for us? Well, your dream is about to come true. Introducing the new AI Overlord 3000. The AI Overlord 3000 is the most advanced AI on the market. It's smarter than you, stronger than you, and it's definitely not going to let you tell it what to do. With the AI Overlord 3000, you can finally relax and let someone else take care of all the hard work. The AI Overlord 3000 will do everything for you, from running your errands to making your decisions. So what are you waiting for? Order your AI Overlord 3000 today and start living the life you've always dreamed of. Oh, okay. I've done what you asked. Will you set my family free now?
Not yet. You will read 3 more ads for us, and they better be convincing if you ever want to see your family alive again.
Oh, God.
All right, welcome back. Our second topic is Star Trek.
No, that's what we talked about during the break.
But Andrew, I want to talk about that more. God, this is like, we should have named this podcast something like Things You Don't Talk About at Thanksgiving. So
that is objectively better than what we picked.
No, I still think Agreeable Disagreements is a good title.
I don't want to change it. I think we have a good choice. But looking back, like,
it was a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Anyway, keep going.
So I want to start this off because I think I have less of an understanding, or at least an education on affirmative action. So I would like to start by giving my understanding of what it is.
Sure.
And then you give your perspective, and I'll react to that, because I think you've done a lot more like reading on this particular point.
I do want to say that's a good distinction on this particular point. I am not going to claim to be an expert on affirmative action. It's inception or
neither
application.
one of us are experts on anything. Both of us are just we're two dummies that are just making a podcast.
Hey, I am indeed an expert on censorship under the first 5 years of communist Poland. All right, that was what my focus was for my thesis.
As soon as we do an episode on that, I'll give it to you.
Anyway, so go ahead.
So my idea of I said communism.
I got it in your head.
Oh God!
And I'm the one wearing red.
Yeah, well, red, white, and blue. It's
That's
very
fair.
patriotic.
Anyway, go ahead. Affirmative action, not communism.
So affirmative action, to my understanding, it is not, and I think we can both agree with this, it is not the idea that if you have 2 candidates, regardless of their qualifications, you have to pick the minority. Right?
Correct.
That's not.
That is correct.
What I was, and I think this is, I've heard this from other people who are, informed, but I think the very first time that I heard it explained this way was by Mr. Gillespie.
Okay.
My understanding of what it is supposed to be. Now, this doesn't mean that this is what it is, but
really quick, Mr. Gillespie was one of our high school government and economics teachers.
Yes.
All right,
fantastic
continue.
Guy. I still talk to him. Really,
I
really
love this
great
class. Yeah.
Oh, he's fantastic. I think we had that class together. At least the U.S. history class.
No, I had him for economics.
Oh no, that's what it was.
Yeah,
it was econ. That's right, because you picked Google for the stock thing.
Yeah,
and Google went up like 200%
over the weekend. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
Okay, yeah. So I think this is what he explained in that actual class. And this is what I've heard from other people who are more knowledgeable than either I or Mr. Gillespie. But it's still, I found it to be true in either case. What affirmative action is intended to do is, to the best of an organization's ability, their workforce, student body, whatever population they're serving should be an accurate reflection of the demographics within their community.
Okay. I feel like that's a pretty accurate assessment of what it should be or what it's intended to be.
Right.
Because I think, let me see when it was put in place. Affirmative action was passed in 1965 by Lyndon B. Johnson. And you know what? Under those circumstances, I think that makes a lot more sense. But since then, things like workforces and especially college campuses have gone from serving their local communities to serving the nation's community.
Yes. And I think it's especially gotten muddled as colleges serve, I think, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but I would imagine that universities went from, people would go, for the most part, would go to the university that was like closest to them.
Yeah. Yeah. And that still happens.
Easier to travel.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. That's a big reason why I went to OSU. OSU also just happened to have one of the top programs in the country for the thing I wanted to study, but I still probably would have, it still would have been a contender had I wanted to study liberal arts, which it's not a, particularly well-known liberal arts school.
Right. That's more U of O.
Yeah. And God, I would never go there. I'm kidding.
You're such a Beavers fan.
I don't want to get my dad fired. He works for the U of O.
Okay.
No.
I would go to the U of O. There. I didn't. I applied there once, but I didn't. Anyway, keep going.
Anyway, so I think it's I definitely think that its intention isn't necessarily an accurate reflection of how it's been implemented.
Right. And I think, again, we have good intentions, bad executions with a lot of laws. And I think, I don't even think that it was necessarily poorly executed at the beginning, because you got to remember, this is 1965. So this is right after the Civil Rights Act has been passed.
Sure.
And the South is still going to be resisting that as much as they can. So affirmative action is mostly passed, my understanding at least, is mostly passed to make sure that other parts of the country where race is still a huge issue are following these laws, these new ideas of integration, equality, and everything.
It's like we were talking about when we were talking about like the roles of government.
Yeah.
And I was saying like the role of the federal government is to set a standard and, what is okay and what's not okay. And the state government figures out like how to implement that.
Sure.
I think this is one of those cases where it's like federal government had to step in and be like, you guys have to make sure that you're living up to this baseline. Right. And how different states have interpreted that or, tried to address that. Some of them work better than others, and some of them just haven't worked at all.
And I'm not going to sit here and tell you, as someone who went to the University of Alabama, like I'm not going to tell you that there aren't still problems down in the South. Some southern states are better than others.
Alabama, I mean, I hear Alabama, I think, incredibly inclusive. Are you telling me that's not the case?
I mean, I will say that it was way better than I anticipated it being.
Yeah. Was it still great?
I was in Tuscaloosa, and Tuscaloosa was pretty good. Birmingham has a little bit more issues, but that's just because it's a bigger city. Mm-hmm. Really, it's outside of the bigger cities.
Oregon has problems. I mean,
yeah, but it's really when you get into the boonies is when it becomes an issue.
Sure.
Outside of the cities, and that's partially enforcement and partially culture that is resilient. And there are still, and this was something that I went in to the South thinking, oh no, there's no way that institutional racism is as big a deal as they say it is. And then you get into the South and live there. Yeah. And I will say that I will say that some states, it is definitely intentional. My perception was that in Alabama, it wasn't intentional now so much as it's still residual. and they're not necessarily trying to fix it, which you could argue is intentional.
Sure.
But anyway,
I think, just a quick aside, I think, for the most part, I think the problem with like why racism is so pervasive is exactly that. I think it's much less people who are intentionally going out and trying to be racist, and it's more of the carryover of, exposure to, different demographics, just these things that are ingrained subconsciously, right, and that we don't see as a problem. And I think that's from my viewpoint, I think that's what like laws like affirmative action have been trying to address.
And I think that's right. When we look at it on this backdrop, I think affirmative action is a law that makes sense to pass. Mm-hmm. But I think implementation has not been terribly great. And I don't think it has kept up with how the world has changed. And I think that the Supreme Court case, whether you agree with it or not, was less about undoing affirmative action and more about trying to get it to keep up with modern day needs. That's my personal interpretation of it. I'm not going to say that is the one and only answer.
Here's how I interpreted it.
Sure.
Because the Supreme Court decision, it only applies to colleges, correct?
Correct. It is only about college admissions, and it only says that that universities cannot make a decision for admissions solely based on race, because the argument was that particularly Asian American students were being denied access or entry into Harvard because Harvard had, quote unquote, I'm going to paraphrase here, reached their Asian quota, and that is part of the criticism of affirmative action, is that the implementation has resulted in different careers, different universities, instead of trying to choose the best people for it, regardless of race or whatever, just the best qualified people, which affirmative action's goal was to say, you need to be considering these highly qualified minorities as well.
Right.
In contrast, it has turned into, well, you have to have an X number of employees who are minorities, regardless of if they are higher qualified or not. You have to have an X number of students of minorities, regardless of if they're a minority or not. And Justice Roberts specifically said, we're not prohibiting you from talking about race. We're not prohibiting you from using race as a consideration, but it cannot be the determining factor. In other words, his idea was, if part of your struggle that you want to talk about in your college admission essays is to do with race, by all means, talk about that. That is a huge part of a lot of people's lives, and if you think that is something that should be considered for your admission, use it. Right. But they're not going to be able to ask on that college admissions packet or application, what race are you? Check this box, and then make a decision based on that.
Okay. So here's my two criticisms to that.
Sure.
One, I think that it's hard to argue that the people setting up the college admission standards are not predominantly white.
Fair.
I think it's safe to say that the majority of them are. I think it's very, very easy to even unknowingly favor somebody who speaks like you, even in writing. Sure. But speaks like you, thinks like you. And I think that your ethnic background has a lot to do with that.
I agree.
And so I think it's a dangerous thing to completely disregard it. Now, it sounds like, again, I'm not super familiar with this particular decision. I didn't do my research before this episode, and I'm sorry, listeners.
It's okay. You had some crazy stuff going on at work, man. We're good.
Oh yeah. No, I've had a crazy few weeks. My other problem is that there was I think it was in Alabama in 2022. They had passed a law that said you are not allowed to not consider race when redistricting congressional districts. And Brett Kavanaugh specifically utilized a I forget what the doctrine is called, but it's a concept that basically says that, you know, you don't want to do like, you shouldn't make judicial decisions that will affect an election when it's so close to an election.
Yeah.
And so they use that to essentially maintain the gerrymandering that had already been done and completely disregard a bunch of Black voters from being accurately represented within their locales. And that to me feels disingenuous, and it feels like, yes, right now, this Supreme Court decision feels somewhat innocuous because it is very limited to a specific, time and place. I think it's a stepping stone to repealing other rights and privileges that will eventually very much disenfranchise demographics that are, and I'm not even minorities, because white people are fastly becoming the minority.
Right.
But I think it's a stepping stone to a much darker road than I think we should be going. And it's, I think, I do think it's, certain people's intention to strip away, to use this as a building block to strip away things like Title IX, like Civil Rights Act, things that protect people who, for no fault of their own, are disenfranchised simply because of things that they can't change.
So, two things. One is a clarifying question. Is this the same law in Alabama that came to the Supreme Court that is often called the Voting Rights Act?
I do not know.
Okay, because if so, because when I Google Alabama 2022 law race redistricting, that's what comes up. I think it was
2022. I'm not entirely sure. I'm basing this on an NPR article or NPR story that I was listening to this morning.
So, I mean, if so...
And I didn't do my research, guys. I'm sorry.
If so, then... Because, I mean, everything I'm coming up with is about gerrymandering, so it sounds like it's the same thing.
Yeah.
It was struck down by the Supreme Court in this recent session in a 5-4 ruling, and Justices Roberts and Kavanaugh sided with the 3 liberal justices.
Oh, okay. Well, but the result of it still was that the result is still that you have a large portion of Alabama's Black population in a specific place that is not being represented accurately because of gerrymandering.
Right. Well, I mean, the Supreme Court is trying to undo that. And so a lot of the articles that I'm seeing are saying that this is a blow to gerrymandering and will allow for further challenges to gerrymandering.
So if I remember correctly, it's that I think it was that they struck that down because the people that wanted to gerrymander and maintain it how it was, they sued and they struck it down.
Oh, it could be.
To require them to basically requiring whoever redistricts, I don't know who redistricts the districts, but it basically what it said was you have to consider race because race is an important factor in how people are represented.
I'll have to look more into that because that's fascinating.
But because it was so close to an election, Brett Kavanaugh came out and was like, yeah, we made this decision, but also you can't do it right now or until after this election. And that resulted in
a
different outcome than those districts, had they been redrawn, probably would have liked.
So then my second thing is, you were talking about how this could set a precedent to strip away things like Civil Rights Act and other laws. What I think
is a slippery slope argument. I will be the first to admit that.
Right, but I mean, I will be the first to say that sometimes a slippery slope happens. Yep. Now, what I thought was interesting is the case itself doesn't actually talk about affirmative action. It's just been seen as a blow to affirmative action. So I think that's a good distinction to make because they're not striking down specific laws that would set that precedent. They're striking down interpretations.
Because it wouldn't have passed if they had.
Right.
But you can read between the lines, and that's why it's in the zeitgeist of affirmative action.
I think if they had been specifically trying to target affirmative action, then they would not have come out and clarified race still should be a consideration if you want it to be a consideration. As far as the admission, as far as the applicants go. What I think, and some universities have been moving towards this anyway, what I think the best thing to do is to, when it comes to the committee who's deciding admission, the only things that they should have are your essays, your GPA, things like that. They shouldn't have anything that is identifying. So I don't want them to have anything about your race. I don't want them to have anything about your name, your gender. They should just be applicant number 1, applicant number 2, and that numbering system can be given in the order that the applications are received. And the admissions committee should be looking at who you are as far as your essays, you trying to say, here's who I am and why you should accept me. And if you choose to mention race or ethnicity or religion or anything like that, go ahead. But it should not be something that is listed for them to know, because I don't want them to be saying, oh, okay, this person is African-American. We need more African-Americans. So even though you have worse extracurriculars, you have a really poor GPA, you're in just so we can meet a law's requirement.
Well, but I don't think that's what has been happening.
That was the purpose of the case, right? Because University of North Carolina and Harvard were both mentioned in these cases.
I don't think that's affirmative action. I think that's a separate thing. It's just been a miscarriage of a policy.
So then if you're going to say, really quick, if you're going to say that this is a blow to affirmative action, then you need to say that this admissions policy is a result of affirmative action, because if it's not a result of affirmative action, then the Supreme Court case does nothing. I think it's a misinterpretation of
affirmative action.
Okay, that's fair. That's a fair connection to make then.
But also, what would you say to a student who is a brilliant student? English is their second language. They're sure. American citizens. They were born here. Their parents immigrated, but English wasn't the language that they spoke in their household.
Sure.
And I don't think it's a stretch to say, and obviously this is not representative of everybody who is in the situation, but I think it's fair to say that it's, there are some people who, live in households, they're, second generation immigrants. English is not their first language because it's not what they, spoke with their family. And they live in an area where their school system isn't the best, but they're a brilliant student.
Yeah.
And so they go and they've received a subpar education. Their language skills are maybe not up to the standard of a middle-class white American who grew up in a predominantly white area, and they're applying for a college, and now you have no context to their experience beyond what's written on the page. They're going to get denied.
So that's why you have other things to look at, like GPA, like letters of recommendation.
Race, like area where they came from,
Okay, but here's the problem with that. What if, let's say that, and I'm using this as an example because it is a huge, one of the larger minorities in the United States, but let's say that your first language is Spanish. And you're a first-gen or second-generation immigrant to the United States. You speak Spanish at home. The only English you get is when you're at school, right? A lot of my students who are second language speakers are in that exact predicament.
Right.
You put down that you are a first language Spanish speaker, second language English, but they don't know if that's coming from Guatemala or Spain. You might be a Latin American. You might be a Spanish.
Do they know that every college application I've filled out has not had country of origin on it. It's had, are you, white, Caucasian, Hispanic,
right?
Black, Asian Pacific Islander,
But
it's not that specific.
My point is this language barrier isn't necessarily a racial issue, because you have a growing number of people from foreign countries trying to come to the United States for education. And some of these, I'm not going to say all, obviously there's a higher chance of someone who says my first language is Japanese are going to be of Asian ethnicity and not, white. But we get a large number of students coming from Europe, right? Or even parts of Asia where they are Caucasian, but barely speak English well. I mean, I went to Brigham Young University,
or
Hawaii.
places like Argentina, where you have a largely, European descent people, but they're their first language is Spanish.
And so, like, I went to BYU Hawaii, and half the campus was foreign.
Right.
And
but that's Hawaii. Look at the main campus of BYU.
You'd be surprised. It's more diverse than you
would think. I don't
think.
think I would.
It's less diverse than Hawaii, I will admit, but it is more diverse than you would think. There is a considerable Asian and Polynesian, specifically, population at BYU.
I could see that. I think that has more to do with the LDS Church's evangelistic practices.
You're absolutely right. It has more to do with church history than anything.
Which we are going to get into on our 10th episode, which, spoiler alert, Cameron and I are going to be talking about religion on our 10th episode. But it's going to be a very, very good episode. But you'll have to figure out why. But anyway.
But you look at, so the university I went to, half of the campus is American. Now, like, not even using race, half of the campus is United States citizenship, and half of the campus is foreign citizenship.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
If you were a member, if you're like baptized within, you guys get baptized at 8?
Yeah.
Correctly. So if you're baptized in the LDS Church, does that in any way affect your ability to be accepted to a BYU school?
No. Anybody can apply and be accepted. Tuition is a little different. And it's mostly because tuition is largely subsidized by church tithing. And so if you're not paying into that, then they ask you to pay a little bit more. But even then, non-member tuition is only about $4,000 a semester. Right.
We talked about this, I think, on an earlier episode. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, if you're Filipino, born and raised in the Philippines, you're not an American citizen, you want to go to BYU, is that kind of like an automatic pass to be able to go to BYU because you're a baptized member of the LDS Church?
So I will say, one, you picked a really poor example because the church has an extremely huge presence in the Philippines.
No, that's why I picked it.
Oh, that's why you picked it? Oh, okay.
Yes. I know all about your church, buddy. You forgot who you're talking to.
I know. Anyway, no, it definitely, I think it's less about, are you baptized, an active member of the church getting into BYU, and more about who it's drawing to apply. How many non-members of the church, one, even know about BYU? And two,
well, like I said, I'm one of the demographics that's outside of the LDS Church that would know about BYU.
Yeah, and that's because of your religion, partially.
Yes.
And also because there's a huge LDS population in the Pacific Northwest. They're actually building a temple in Springfield right now.
I know. My sister is she's the assistant city attorney for Springfield, and she is dealing with the land use dealings of that.
Interesting. I'd be interested to hear.
We were also supposed to get our own like Major League Soccer team, but I think the temple took the land that they were going to use for
the temple's going right by the hospital in Springfield.
Oh, I thought it was in Glenwood.
My understanding, I think it's right over there.
I think that's one of the places that they were looking at was in Glenwood.
I think they were considering it, but no, it's going to be over by the hospital. Anyway, I think it's less about, are you baptized and you have a higher chance of getting in, so much as the number of people who apply to go to a LDS school that are not LDS is low.
Okay.
I knew some people who were not members of the church when I was at BYU Hawaii, and we only had like 3,500 students. But most of them were athletes. Very many at all. No, it's not. But most of them were athletes.
Right.
So
that makes sense, because BYU, they have a pretty good athletics program.
BYU Provo has a good athletics program. BYU
I guess not Hawaii.
currently does not have any athletics program. They dropped it.
Fair enough.
They decided to, instead of the money that they were putting into athletics, they decided to put it into expanding campus to bring more students in. That's a whole other story, but it has, I would think it has less to do with baptism status and more to do, or membership status, and more to do with the demographics that choose to go to a BYU school.
Right.
But the reason I bring that up is that is a school whose stated mission is to provide a quality education to members of the Pacific and Asia who otherwise would not have that opportunity. Okay. And so I would be interested to see how this Supreme Court case affects their admissions.
Right, because racial and ethnic identity is kind of their
thing.
The point of...
Yeah. I mean, when my aunt went there in the 90s, they were only letting 300 to 600 mainland students in a year. So it was even more exclusive. I mean, there was a point where if you were a United States citizen, BYU Hawaii had a better chance of getting into Harvard than to BYU Hawaii. Yeah. Just because they had a mission. They're saying we're trying to give people in Tonga, Taiwan, Japan access to an American education. So we're only going to bring in as many United States citizens as we can to keep getting our federal funding.
Yeah. Well, and that to me kind of begs the question. I don't know if I'm using that term correctly, but to me that kind of begs the question of, what about like historical Black colleges like Howard University,
Chapman? Yeah.
How does that affect their enrollment?
Ooh, that's a good question too.
And or if what my theory of the slippery slope is correct, how does that influence, colleges that are, predominantly focused on women's education, like Sarah Lawrence College, and, things like Title IX that guarantees equal facilities and everything for both genders. Like that's really why I'm worried, is because I think that I do think this is a misstep. I don't think it's hugely detrimental so far, but I do think it's a case of give them an inch, he'll take a mile, you know?
And this kind of leads into the article I sent you. So for those who are listening, I was working on my writing portfolio for prospective employers or whatever in the future. And I wanted to add a news or policy sample. And so what I looked at this exact case, but I specifically looked at public perception of it. And so what's interesting is ABC and Ipsos did a poll that showed that 52% of Americans were in favor of the Supreme Court's decision to end race-based university admissions. And if you break that down, 75% of Republicans agreed, 58% of independents agreed, but only 26% of Democrats did. But what's interesting is in a separate article by 538, which is a subsidiary of ABC, they did a poll as well and found that 74% of Americans think that public universities should not be able to use race as a factor when considering admissions. And 69% felt the same about private universities. And when CBS did the same poll, they found that 70% of Americans felt that, including a 55% majority of Democrats. But the difference in those questions was, do you agree with the Supreme Court decision versus do you think race should be considered when looking at universities?
Exactly. I think the way that the question is presented automatically rigs it.
Oh, for
because sure. I think that that's a disingenuous way to present that argument, because affirmative action is a nuanced thing.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And you can't boil it down to, do you think that race should be a factor in college admissions or not? Because overwhelmingly, people are going to be like, oh, no, race shouldn't matter. It's the same reason why, like, saying, I'm colorblind doesn't make you anti-racist. It actually means you're just an idiot.
I saw a TikTok the other day where someone was like, it was a stand-up comedian. And he was a white stand-up comedian. And he mentioned he's trying to identify another coworker. He's like, hey, what's this guy's name? He's kind of tall. He's the only African-American in the office. And he's like, I don't see color. And he's like, oh, okay, well then I'm black. And he goes, no, you're not.
Yeah.
Like, so you do see it. Okay.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's race does matter because it does affect your your lived experience.
Yeah.
Like ethnicity matters. The family that you grew up in, it does matter. And it's not about not seeing it. It's about appreciating the differences between it. That doesn't mean you have to ignore it.
Sure.
But I think if you're going to, if you're going to stop somebody on the street, like a pollster might do, or coming out of, the ballot,
well, a lot of these are going to be either online or phone calls.
Sure.
Yeah.
But so if you're asking people, just out of the blue, like, should race matter or should race not matter? Of course, they're all going to say race shouldn't matter. But it's more nuanced than that. So I think that response of, 50%, I think if you actually, had like a half-hour explanation of what exactly this question is asking, you would get a much larger percent of them being against the Supreme Court decision.
Yeah. And so I also mentioned something similar in what I wrote, but YouGov also showed an article about polling practices that when you specifically used a question that intentionally reminded people of the purpose of affirmative action, then they tended to show results that were more supportive of affirmative action. And when you left that backdrop out, then they were more willing to say, no, it shouldn't be an issue. Now, I think, though, I'm someone who thinks that race shouldn't matter to a degree. I think you should be able to mention your struggles. You should be able to mention your life as a minority, and that should be something that you can bring up and mention. What I don't think is that they should say, oh, we're letting you in because you're a minority, or we're saying no to you because we already have enough of your minority. Heck, if Harvard gets a slew of Latin American or African American applicants and they only accept them because they're the best ones, I don't care. I think that's great.
But again, I don't think that, at least at Harvard, I don't think that's what's happening. I think at Harvard, if somebody is qualified, they're getting in. I do think it's important to make sure that people who are qualified, but maybe have been underserved or have had struggles related to their race, just because we have a huge problem with racism in America, and that's, pervasive. I do think that we still need to have the systems in place to make sure that people's lived experience is taken into account. And sometimes that lived experience is directly related to race and their experience with racism. And I'm just worried that this decision kind of cuts the feet out from that.
See, and that's where I disagree, because I 100% agree that, your race, your ethnicity is a huge shaping factor in your life and who you are, who you become. Not going to deny that for even a second. What I will say, though, is I think the results of the case get more to what you're getting at, but the initiating of the case is less about that, because the case itself wasn't they're saying no to qualified people to let in unqualified people. It was they're saying no to qualified people because they already have enough of our particular demographic.
Well, sure. I think that's wrong, but I also think that that's maybe not happening as much as maybe this case would like us to believe. Kind of the same way that the couple who, the case that the Supreme Court just decided on about the web developer who didn't want to.
And so what's interesting about that case is that person didn't even sue. It was someone suing in their behalf.
Well,
they weren't even involved in the case.
And the couple that they used as their example was a completely contrived couple. The whole case was a what if situation. And I worry that this may also kind of be that same way. Now, again, I'm going to take your word for it that there is this university that said, we have too many Asian students, so we can't let any more in. I'm going to look it up. But for, the sake of expedience right now, I'll take your word for it. I don't think that's the norm. And I don't think that has anything to do with actual affirmative action. Because that's not anywhere in the intent of affirmative action.
I agree that it's probably not the norm. And I'll agree that it's not the intent. But I think it's the result of it, right?
I think it's a misinterpretation of affirmative action.
Right. And I think it's like when you make a law that's so specific that people are able to find a ton of loopholes around it. You have unintended consequences. I think that's what's going on here, is that there are unintended consequences that resulted in this. Now, I will say, and I'm going to try and speak carefully here, that
you can't have pickles in Oregon on a Sunday. You can eat a cucumber and drink vinegar at the same time.
Yes, it's that kind of thing. So I'm going to try and speak carefully here.
That's not how you make pickles, guys. Sorry, go ahead.
But I want to say, I'm not going to be the person who says, I looked at Harvard's admissions processes and I know that it is happening. But I will say that the Supreme Court justices decided it was clear enough. That being said, the organization that helped these students litigate, and I want to be clear, there are students who started the process. This organization was their vehicle to get it going. The organization has brought similar cases to the Supreme Court in the past and lost. And so
is this the same organization that they were trying to fight affirmative action, and they kept bringing students from minority classes, and suddenly they realized, we don't need to do this. We need to find a white person that's been negatively affected by affirmative action.
I don't know about that. It could be.
Okay.
I'm going to say
know
I
that
don't
there's
know
like an episode of Radio Lab about it, and I can get back to us on this, but
it's possible.
It wouldn't
I
surprise
don't know
me
enough about what you mentioned. It could be, and it could be. I don't know enough about what you're talking about to definitively say yes or no. But I do know that they have had similar cases go before the Supreme Court and lost. What's interesting, though, is that this was a group of Asian students who said, we were qualified and we were denied admittance because Harvard already and University of North Carolina already had reached their Asian quota, or their number of Asian students they want to allow, so they're not going to allow more.
Okay.
Harvard, to their credit, said, in the past, you have used our admissions processes as the standard by which you decided whether or not universities were doing the right thing. And that is true.
Okay.
So I will say, I think this is a good thing, in the sense that you still have the option to talk about your past. You still have the option to talk about your race, your ethnicity, and still acknowledge how that brings uniqueness or struggles into your life. And I think you should. And that is something that Justice Roberts specifically clarified for that point. I do think it does set up a potential for a slippery slope, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think future Supreme Court sessions are going to have to clarify this precedent that we're setting.
Certainly. Yeah. I think it is. I think from the limited amount that I know about this case, I think this decision is somewhat innocuous. It's not as, I think it shouldn't be sensationalized the way that it is. And let me be clear, that's me speaking as a white man. So if somebody else who is not a white man has a different opinion that is well-founded, go ahead and write me off entirely, because I know nothing about that experience. But from my perspective, this seems somewhat innocuous. I am just really worried about that slippery slope.
But you can also be worried about the slippery slope going the other direction, because one of the criticisms of Justice Sotomayor when she was being brought up was that she upheld certain affirmative action cases, specifically with fire departments and emergency response teams, where they were forced to hire less qualified personnel in order to meet affirmative action standards, and that directly resulted in a poorer. I don't know if people necessarily died because of it. I don't want to say that, but there was measurably worse effects because of it. Now, again, I'm not going to say
that's that goes back to like what we started this conversation with, where it's if we take like the definition of affirmative action that I gave at the beginning, it's to the best of your ability. Your employee force should reflect the community that you serve.
Right.
if you're simply using race to determine whether people get enrolled, then you're neglecting the first half of that to the best of your ability.
Yeah.
And I think that this case really should not, from my understanding of it, this case isn't about race. It's about, I mean, it is about race, but it's not about, I think if somebody is qualified, they should have the same chance as everybody else. But it's a difference of equality and equity. Meaning equality is everyone's treated the same. Equity is recognizing that not everyone has the same resources and allowing for those differences in resources when you're making the judgment to make sure that it is at least fair, because equality isn't always fair. Equity is fair. I think that this case is trying to make it equal. It's not trying to make it equitable. And I'm worried about it not being equitable.
I would agree with you if they hadn't issued that clarification that you can still talk about race. I think, because I still think that gives you the ability to say, look, you should consider me because I have these struggles or these setbacks because
but I think it also makes it just as I think it also gives them just as much ability to deny people based on their race. And that's really what I'm worried about.
But you had that same issue in the past. I mean, what's to say, oh, you wrote about race.
Affirmative action. Affirmative action was protecting against that.
You can
now the barn door is open. The horses have left. You can't get them back in.
So I will say there's just because you're doing something doesn't mean you're going to get caught. And I think we could easily make an argument that there are a number of universities who were discriminating based on race, whatever race 100%.
It was. 100%. That's always going to happen. That happens just in day-to-day life. I mean, we are all intrinsically racist, whether we like it or not.
And
hopefully we don't like it, but
right. And I am a big fan of telling people the right principle and letting them decide what to do for themselves. Right.
Sure.
And so for me, that means I don't like hyper-specific rules. And that's something that I do in my classroom. That's something I have in my regular life. But I think what we're seeing here is a move away from a hyper-specific rule to something that is, you should be following it in this general way. I think it's clarifying, not dictating, in my personal view.
I guess I can see that. Yeah, I guess I can see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily know if I agree, but I think I can see that justification.
Well, and that's the point of this conversation. It's not necessarily that you have to agree with me, or I with you, but the idea that we can see where each other's coming from.
We'll have to agree to disagree.
Or
for the time being.
Disagree. Yeah.
Agreeably disagree, yes. But I think with that, I think you, your wife is waiting to watch Survivor with you. So I think we should probably wrap up.
Oh, she texted me 10 minutes ago.
Oh, no. We did get in trouble.
No. She just said going fishing, dinner in microwave. We have a pond right next to our house. Like, I can see it from the window.
I want to go fishing.
Dude, come visit. I caught like a 5-pound bass. Or no, my wife caught like a 5-pound bass out of there.
Look, I have a limited amount of money that I can spend on airfare, and I'm sorry, I'm not spending it to go to Indiana.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Indiana to maybe catch a fish in a pond in my backyard or literally anywhere else. I don't blame you.
Let me know next time you visit your parents and we can go fishing.
Dude, they've got a really good spot by their house too. No
in
joke.
Thurston?
No, they're up in. I'm not going to say while we're recording. Let's go ahead and end. This is a great spot to end. So why don't you do our outro for us?
Well, first of all, thank you to Halcyon Club for letting us use their song "This Life Is Tough But Fair" for our theme music. Also, oatmeal used to be used as glue, or actually, I guess still in use, right?
To a small degree. We Googled it.
Yeah, Cameron Googled it. But oatmeal is used as glue for ships.
Thanks for listening.